I'm Nick Terzo, and you are listening to The Radical. My guest this week comes from the music hotbed that was Minneapolis. His new solo record, Jump for Joy, comes out in June. Gary Louris joins me this week to discuss 3 decades with the Jayhawks, working with legendary producers like Bob Ezrin, Rick Rubin, George Drakoulias, Brendan O'Brien, and also with artists such as Ray Davies and Peter Buck. We discuss the difference in balancing the inspirational and the craft of songwriting. Coming up after the break, my conversation with Gary Louris. It's Nick, and the Radical Podcast is now powered in part by Playboy Condoms. At Playboy, they are committed to products that make sexual intimacy safe, playful, and fun for all. That's why they have introduced Playboy Condoms designed for maximum pleasure and safety with unique quality and scent features that exceed international quality standards. Now available at Walmart or Walmart.com. Respect your partners. Hey, Gary, thank you for joining the show. I'm really happy to have this discussion with you.
My pleasure.
Welcome. It's been quite a year. At least it seems you've been delved deep into your creativity during it. Are you still based? You're based in Minneapolis still?
Based in Minneapolis, but living in Canada right now.
Are you really?
Yes, I met and fell in love with a beautiful Canadian woman and relocated here, at least for the time being. I think we'll see where we'll end up, but now is not the time to be buying a house on either side of the border. So we're up here in Canada for now, and it's interesting.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. Very happy.
That's exciting. So you have a new record coming out, I believe, on June 4th. It's called Jump for Joy. It's a solo record. And I've heard the one track, the single. It's fantastic. Almost Home. Yes?
Right.
And tell me a little bit about this. I mean, it seems you've been productive because the Jayhawks didn't you put out a new record last year?
It was last year. Well, it came out in 2000, late. When was it? Did it come out? Jeez, I got to think about this. Yeah, last year. But the last live show we did was March 8th in Northampton, Massachusetts. We played the 6th and 7th of March in Brooklyn, and it was right when COVID was starting to hit, and people were really, the first time we got the elbow bumps and people being a little wary about being close. It's just the very beginning. But we put a record out called XOXO. Obviously, we didn't tour it, but we put one out. That's it. We put it out in the summer of last year, but recorded it the year before. Now, this record, Jump for Joy, has been done for a couple of years.
Oh, it has been.
Yeah, it was ready to go, and then it was just discussed that maybe it's better to, not to confuse the situation, or, the business. There's, you got to take in consideration press and all that, and so I don't quite understand it all but after all these years. But I said, okay, fine. I waited this long. I'll wait some more. So I did not make this record during COVID. This is a couple years before that. And
wow.
But I haven't really listened to it much, and now I'm excited to have it come out now because there isn't anything else coming out for the Jayhawks right this moment, and it gives me some focus and something new to promote.
Is this like your second solo album you've done?
Embarrassingly so, only my second, and I'm hoping to glut the airwaves and the music business with solo material from now on because I can. I did this record, Jump for Joy, and there's the cover back there, all by myself in a little 11 by 14 room, which is very different than the Vagabonds record, the record I put out in 2008. Which was an ensemble cast, with a bunch of people in a nice LA studio and a producer, which I love. But I'm also really intrigued with this. The mad scientist in me just kind of tinkering in my room, left to my own devices. And so that's what this record is. It's just me.
So it's 100% you.
It's all me. I'm playing guitars, acoustic guitars, electric guitars, virtual bass, usually virtual drums, synths and some keys and strings, and of course vocals, and all done pretty much, on headphones in a little room.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's a great experiment, man.
Well, this is something I can continue to do because I like to tinker, and I like to, I'm not a Luddite. I do understand some of the tech stuff, not to a nth degree, but I know how to make my way around some different software programs and recording, and it's fun. I fancy myself a bit of a producer, and so it's a good exercise in that. And it's it's just the way it is. Again, the music business. People don't buy records, meaning musicians like me who are not struggling necessarily, but not Taylor Swift or whoever, we can't really afford to go to expensive studios anymore and hire a big producer and hire people. It's kind of a necessary evil that you learn how to do things yourself, which is great, but it's also sad because you cut a lot of other people out of the business. Just like people say, well, I get my music for free now. But, they don't realize how much they're missing because you get what you pay for. And there's a lot of musicians who otherwise would be making music, but have been squeezed out. And so there's a lot of lost art, I think, that's happened.
Yeah, let alone down the chain, right? When you think of
down the chain,
recording engineers, people that worked at studios.
Right. Exactly.
Down the chain. And so, with the Jayhawks, that's been a 30-year, how long have you guys been together? 30 some odd?
We got together 30 odd some years. Well, let me do the math. It's more than that. I have a little trouble with my brain's a little slow to 35 years. 1985. February of 1985 is when we first got together and rehearsed. And so is that 35 years ago? Yeah. Wow.
And
we're an 80s band.
Did my friend George Draculius, is that who signed you? You were signed to American initially. You had would you have an independent record, then signed to American?
We did our own record on Bunkhouse called, creatively enough, The Jayhawks. We had a lot of label interest right away. Like we just kind of hit the ground running, and we had to make a lot of demos for labels like Atlantic, I remember, or A&M, and a label called IRS back at the time. And what they do is they give us a little money and they say, I love this, but I don't know what to call it. And my boss doesn't, isn't quite sold. We were the king of having big fans in the music business, in the labels, just a little below the decision-making level. So we love you. I think let's just make a couple more demos, and that led, and of course then people just didn't know what to do with it, to us assembling our second record on a local legendary Minneapolis label called Twin Tone. Sorry, there's a guitar store called Twin Tone. Twin Tone Records, where bands like The Replacements put stuff out early, and a bunch of great music. So we eventually, a guy named Dave Ayers there at Twin Tone, who worked at A&M. Maybe you know Dave.
I do know Dave.
He stars on publishing.
Yep.
He was the head of maybe he was A&R guy, or I don't remember what he was, VP. There weren't that many people who worked there. He got us, we did a deal there where we just took all our demos that we had made for all these major labels and overdubbed them and put out a record called Blue Earth. And one day in 1990, I think it was, that was probably 88 we put out Blue Earth, maybe something like that. 1990 or so, Dave was good friends with George Draculius. George was Rick Rubin's right-hand man at what was then called Deaf American. And Dave Ayers and George had worked together, I believe, at A&M at some point. So they stayed friendly and stayed in touch. And Dave and George were talking on the phone one day, and Dave was in the office in Twin Town, and he was playing Blue Earth in the background. And George heard it. He said, "Who are those guys? I'm flying in tomorrow." So we after being together 5 years or so, we had an overnight success there. George flew in, hung out, went to see us play this New Year's Eve show at the Hyatt Regency in Minneapolis, signed us, and that was that. I think he saw us as kind of, and Rick maybe, Ruben, as kind of the Birds, where, and at the time they had the kind of, or the Black Crowes, and they were kind of the Stones. So kind of getting that kind of thing, the Stones and the Birds and that kind of thing. So that was maybe part of the mindset.
Tell me about, I've had Bob Mold on here, and we talked in the fall. Talk about Minneapolis back then, and like as a creative hub. I mean, just the amount of talent there, and great music and great bands coming. Tell me a little bit about that community.
Well, I've had this discussion before, why aren't so many great bands come from Minneapolis and not so many from Pittsburgh or, Cincinnati or somewhere? Not to pick on them. But at one point in the early days, it was explained to me that for a burgeoning music scene to happen, you needed 3 or 4 things. One was a really cool club. You had to have maybe a cool up-and-coming record store kind of hub kind of thing, and maybe a label, and I don't know, maybe it was a radio station. I don't remember what it was. But we had First Avenue, which was the house that Prince built, and First Avenue 7th Street entry. So it had this cool thing, club there. And then with a guy named Steve McClellan, who was kind of the Jack Nicholson of rock. And he was really helped bands a lot along with that whole staff. Then there was Orfolk. We call it Orfolk, but it was Orfolk Jokopus or Orfolk Jokopus, depending how you want to say it, which was an amazing record store named after the owner's 2 favorite records, which was Or by Skip Spence of the famous Moby Grape, one of my favorites, and another one of my favorites, and I don't know if it's Folk Jokopus or Folk Jokopus, and that's a record by the incredible Roy Harper, who is a master British folk dude, and ironically one of my son's favorites. So that was there, and that served as kind of the clubhouse. Bands would come, replacements would hang out there. We would be there, other bands. You'd kind of go in there. And you'd see Peter Jesperson, who was part of, he was the Svengali, kind of the tastemaker. He'd spin records, and you go to Peter, what is that? Oh, that's the new Big Star record. Or, who's Big Star? And he'd teach you about that. Or, go in there to get the new Clash single or whatever. So it was kind of like this cool record store hang. And then there was Twin Tone, which was a label. And so, anyway, there was a lot going on. But the main thing about Minneapolis that differed, I thought, from a lot of other scenes, because there was always the scene. There was a scene, and then a number of years later, there'd be another scene. It was, it was Boston for a while, right? It was the hot spot. It was Minneapolis. Then it was Seattle. And then it was Austin or whatever. There's certain. Funny enough, Chicago never was, even though it had a lot of great music. But I think even at some point Omaha became kind of a hot spot. But the thing I thought that differentiated Minneapolis from other scenes or hotspots or towns was the diversity, because we had the best of, the best kind of punk rock bands like Husker Du, and we had the Replacements, those kind of bands that were kind of the best of that genre, and we had us, which I'd like to think were one of the better, what would be considered roots rock for, I hate any of the terms, but that kind of stuff. But then they had, and all these different rock bands, oh, so many. And then they had the Prince and the Time and that whole scene. All that was happening at the same time and kind of feeding off each other, even though they were kind of separate. But the town was kind of on fire.
Were there a lot of recording studios back then, or not so many?
Yeah, there were. There were enough. I mean, I wasn't in L.A., but yeah, there were some nice places. And early on, I don't remember when Prince built Paisley Park, but there was that too. But there are a lot of cool studios, not necessarily as good as what you get out in L.A.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's a fascinating city, I think, with its history. So
it is. It is. It still has a lot of stuff, although I don't really know what goes on. I will tell you this about Minneapolis. If they loved a band, they embraced it. And they'd embrace it before a lot of other towns. You found a lot of bands up and coming, or even who came, coming back to Minneapolis and playing it a lot. Like Wilco and Sunvolt and all those bands. They first caught on, I think, in Minneapolis, and they knew it. So, very much a music crazy town.
It's fantastic. I mean, were you there during much of last year, though, with all the kind of
I was
everything going on in the world? What was it like to be there in the middle of last year?
Well, it's weird because I had been away for a couple of years, and I moved back to Minneapolis the day that happened. Or was it the day after? I don't remember. But the riots were going on. George Floyd, of course, had been killed probably the day before, or was it that day? I think it was the day before. So I drove into town, and everybody's like, "You're going to Minneapolis?" And I remember getting to the Airbnb. My son was with me. And I was moving back to this place, waiting to get in, and just hearing all the helicopters and the sirens, and you could hear marching, and it was scary because when I first moved to Minneapolis, it was white bread, man. In '73, it was very monochrome, Everybody was blonde and white. Nobody locked their doors, and it was just very Scandinavian, and it just evolved into a more diverse city, but with a lot of problems. And when I first started touring, or when we first started touring the Jayhawks, you go to Europe or something, people go, "Oh, you're from Minneapolis, home of Prince." Then years later it was, "You're from Minneapolis, the home of the Mall of America." And now you go somewhere, you're from Minneapolis. Oh my God, George Floyd. So its profile has changed quite a bit. And, for better and for worse, obviously horrible things have happened. But obviously these things have been beneath the surface for quite a while and need to be dealt with. But very sad.
Yeah, it is. But the education of it, though, for a lot of people is valuable, and
it is. And being in Canada and watching it through the eyes of Canadians, my wife, and just not understanding the violence and the guns. Yeah,
they can't comprehend that, right? The gun thing.
They don't understand. They just don't. We think of moving there. She's afraid of the gun violence, and I don't blame her. But it's not quite the same up here.
Crazy. Well, back to creativity and being a musician. I'm curious, as you've gone through, age gives us a different kind of EQ, I call it, right? Which is the emotional quotient. And as you dealt with the Jayhawks and like the many iterations, like how has that propelled you? Has it been frustrating? Has it been great because you become this new thing, you evolve as you go? How has that worked in your position with the band?
Well, it has evolved from the early days in the band when I was a little bit more of a supporting character to when we got into the Hollywood Town Hall, tomorrow the Greengrass records, where I became an equal with Olsen, and we kind of had the Lennon-McCartney thing where we kind of fighting for our songs space, to the point where all of a sudden he left and there was that great fear and yet freedom and exhilaration, because you're like, you can do anything, and we can now do what we want, and explore some areas that normally couldn't. So that was a very exciting time. Also a time, Sound Alive's period, where thought we were making our last record. Well, we'll do one more. Probably nobody's going to like this, and label was questioning it. And that taught me something, to just do what you want to do, with the idea that it's like your last record instead of worrying how much it's going to sell. So that was exhilarating. As far as changes in the band, it's been a pretty steady crew. I mean, there's been some changes. I think it helps that, Mark Perlman has been there, our bass player, since day one. And he's a very important part of the band. There's no real role players in the band. There's just kind of... and our keyboard player, Karen, came and went, and then she came back because after she had raised her child. Tim, our drummer, has been there since 95, and probably the drummer we always had wanted from day one. But and there's been some other people come and go as fifth members, but the core of Mark Perlman, Tim O'Regan, myself, and Karen has been pretty steady throughout the years. Your question was really about how the shifting lineups, how it's affected creativity?
Yeah,
or just aging?
But as you age, I mean, look, our emotional cue goes up, right? We can deal with things differently than throwing things, which we might have done in our 20s. I'm just wondering.
I throw a golf club now. I throw a golf club now.
Well, I don't blame you. I could always throw a golf club. So, but I'm just curious if it changed the whole creative experience for you guys, because then, maybe some of that tension's relieved and just puts you in a different space creatively.
Well, I don't know. I definitely have changed over the years, not necessarily because of band dynamics. Although the last Jayhawks record was one where I thought, okay, you guys, what do you got? Let me not steer the ship so much, and let's open the door a bit more and see if you guys want to take a little bit more control of the record and see how it goes. And that was a good experience. I don't know if it's... I joke that I painted myself into a corner now, because now what do I do? Next record? My turn again. You had your chance. No. But I think it was healthy for the band, and it made a good record. But emotional quotient. I don't remember how I dealt with songwriting and making records so much back in the day. I know that it becomes harder as you get older.
How's
because
that?
I don't know why. Well, for one thing, maybe you start getting up to a certain point, and you're like, okay, well, I'm more accepting. This is my life. This is good. Instead of like, I gotta get ahead. Maybe. Although I think I always say the lack of success for our band has probably made us a better band, more successful, longer, because we always feel like we have something to prove. We still haven't reached where we had wanted to get. But I don't know. I mean, tell me one. Let me think of one. Maybe there's a few. In the rock world who have done their best work after the age of 35, 40. I mean, you can say Dylan had that comeback and made some cool records. And yeah, you can get into some eclectic old, Leonard Cohen and Tom Waits or something.
Sometimes the Stones surprise you once in a while, right? I mean, not maybe a complete work, but, some of the songs.
Yeah. But mostly, no. Not, maybe if you're a jazz musician, a blues guy, classical, but not very many I can think of. And why is that? I don't know. I don't know if it's your drive goes down, or you feel like I've already done all that. You start feeling like you're repeating yourself, and you start thinking about trying to do a song like, you start thinking about your process, like, how did I write that song back then? Or, boy, I've already done this. And like,
well, Well, it's a pirate ship, right? When you're younger, too. It's like us against the world. We're outlaws.
Yeah.
And, you're not going to maintain that at 50. You know what I mean?
No, definitely not. And yet, I think because we're not a true rock band, I've never called ourselves a real rock and roll band. Rock and roll bands like the Black Crowes or something like that. That's swagger, Black Crowes, rock. I think we've just kind of an oddball. So I feel like I still feel like what we do is really good. Are we at our peak? I don't think so. Maybe not. Maybe we'll surprise ourselves, but it's hard to maintain that over the years in any kind of creative field, I think. But especially rock, which has really always been termed a young person's game,
Right. And I mean, you are a producer too, and aside from a songwriter, performer, you've had some interesting collaborations, though. You've gotten to work with some real giants in my mind. Whether it was having George and Rick around at the beginning, or Bob Ezrin did a record with you. You did a record with Peter Buck, right? Mm-hmm. What did you take away from any of those? I mean, as far as maybe as a producer, maybe as an artist.
Oh yeah, I certainly have. I certainly have, as a musician and as a producer. I certainly, when I produce things myself, I hear myself tapping into stuff that other producers I worked with that I respect have said to me or said to us. George, I love George. George and I are still good friends. I like to think so. We stay in touch. And George if you know George,
yes,
he's very endearing, and he has kind of he doesn't always want to give. He's not the kind of guy who would give you, just nice encouragement. That was great.
He's not coaching the Little League team, no.
No. One of his big lines, and I've used it before, is "Don't embarrass me." You're getting ready to play a solo. He goes, "Gary, don't embarrass me." A lot of those kind of things, a lot of little sayings he would have, and his attitude. Bob Ezrin was very much about being irreverent. I remember him telling me, "Gary, you don't owe your audience anything." Because we were making a big splashy pop record with Smile, and I knew it was going to alienate some people because we'd come up the ranks as a kind of a rootsy band, and he's like, "Don't worry about him. Don't worry about him." He is also the guy who really kind of called me on some of my songwriting once in a way that I have taken to heart. And
you do that privately, or do you do that in front of your bandmates?
I think it was probably privately. And I'm still friends with Bob. I mean, Bob and I stay in touch, and he's a fantastic person. He said, "Gary, you're an inspired songwriter." He said this during the Smile, and I'm like, "Thanks, Bob." He goes, "I don't necessarily mean that as a compliment." He said, "You are good at getting the inspired idea of a song, but you're not as good at the crafting." He said, "You need to work on the crafting, the rolling up your sleeves and fine tuning and rewriting the lyrics and honing it." And that's very true of me. It still is to this day. Even if I try to do I've done a few workshops, music writing, and I've always said there are two basic sides to songwriting, other than producing and just the writing itself: inspired and crafting, which is the conscious mind and the unconscious mind. And I am definitely better at the unconscious stream of consciousness kind of thing, and that's why I have so many song ideas, but not as many that are finished. So he called me on that. I worked with Brian Paulson, who I loved. He did Sound of Lies record. Rick Rubin at one time said, "Gary, stop trying to be so arty." He said that, "Stop trying to be so arty," because we'd sit on his couch and listening to all my song ideas for, I think this was for an album called Ray Davies Music, and he was the executive producer, and he would just call me on it sometimes. I don't care. I like to be arty, maybe more than he wants, but I remember that, and working with Jim Scott, who's a fantastic producer, engineered, but basically produced a lot of those Petty records and the Chili Peppers records, and who else? I don't remember. Tons of people.
What was the Peter Buck experience like? I mean, you kind of went to where he was and recorded like in residence somehow, or how did you do that?
No, we went to, we went to Portland to record where he was living, and he just at one time said, I want to produce the band whenever you want. No charge kind of thing. I just want to work, and I like you guys. So he came to Minneapolis and did pre-production, but basically we went to Portland because that was not only Peter, but it was really a team effort. There's a guy named Tucker Martine who's produced a lot of great stuff, and he has a great studio in Portland. And really, Peter was kind of like the executive producer, kind of sit back and get the overall thing. And Tucker was very much hands-on kind of guy. So, but we had to work with people, like Brendan O'Brien. Before he became huge, he was the engineer on some of our stuff with George. And I don't know who I'm forgetting, but yeah, I've been lucky enough to be around and going to really great studios, Ocean Way and Sound City, Sound Shitty, Sound Factory. I can't think of all the places we did it.
Did you guys do anything at A&M or ever?
I did. I sang some backup at A&M. Yeah, that's great. The old Charlie Chaplin studios and Capitol. And then just my experience that the band had with Ray Davies of the Kinks, where we ended up being in Abbey Road, and we had spent a lot of time at Conch Studios in North London with him.
How did that come together? Is he a fan of yours? Like you guys kind of backed him on his couple of his records, or how did that come together?
We backed him on his last two records. It was really through an A&R guy, a friend, John Jackson at Sony Legacy, who also plays with us occasionally when we can, was running that project. And he knew that Ray was doing a project called Americana, and he was really into kind of a retrospective in his connection with America. And he wanted kind of an American band, and he really wanted a band. He didn't want to have a bunch of session players. He wanted a band. So we were over in Spain playing, and our A&R guy, John, said, do you want to start going home? Will you go to London and have a little audition with Ray? And Ray had auditioned other people over time, and it hadn't worked. But we all clicked, and we ended up going back 2 or 3 more times and did 2 records with him. But why I brought it up was you're asking about my experiences with producers, and Ray is a very underappreciated music producer, because if you think about it, like the Beatles had George Martin, and Stones had Glenn Johns or whoever, Jimmy, what was his name? I forget. A lot of famous bands had their guys, and the Kinks, pretty much Ray produced it, other than the very early stuff. And he was really good at it. Just like Jimmy Page was a great producer. And Led Zeppelin never had a George Martin. They had Jimmy Page. So anyway, rambling.
No, fantastic. I mean, it's just such a collection of people you've collaborated with. I think it's really impressive. So.
Yeah, I know. I was just thinking about all the backup singing we did. There was a time where we were doing, like the Counting Crows and the Black Crows and the Wallflowers and John Hyatt and all this stuff, and Maria McKee. Yeah, there was a lot going on.
The glorious 90s.
LA was the 90s, yeah, I know.
So amazing. Well, I'm excited for the solo record. The positivity in it's going to be something we all need, so your timing's really good, judging just from the title and listening to Almost Home.
Well, Jump for Joy is a little bit double entendre.
I was trying to look for something to get us out of this.
Yeah, it's a little bit not quite. It's not, I'm never going to be the party album guy. I'm never going to be the. That's what I was explaining to my wife. I mean, like, reggae depresses me. I don't know why. Or happy music. Not that all reggae is happy, but it's great. But I'm just never. I'm always going to be drawn to the darker side.
But your sound, your music sounds. It definitely has the pop elements to it. I mean, what you write, you're very poppy.
But the lyrics tend to be a little bit. And I do write real poppy stuff, but when I was approached through my publisher, by Nickelodeon, to write a kid's song for an app, and just to skip ahead to the end of the story, they didn't use it. They should have, because it's great, and I'm going to make a kids record now because of it.
There you go.
Like, I love this. You can just do something really simple, and it's like writing those Beatles songs when they were just into that. Just simple. Get to the point. There's no such thing as a slow build in a kid's song. But they had a little directive of what they were looking for. And the woman from Nickelodeon was very nice, got on the phone, and she said, we're aware of your Jayhawk stuff, and you're really, quote-unquote, excited. But you might, basically the line was, you might want to dial down the melancholy. And, that it can have kind of a sadness to what I do. So, and even when they passed on it, I was talking to my manager about it. He said, next time you might want to just get somebody else to sing it, because your voice just sounds kind of sad. And that's just who I am, although ironically, I'm not that sad.
I was going to say, you don't seem sad to me at all. So I hope this podcast doesn't come off as two sad guys together. So
no, party. We're
party guys.
Party on, Wayne.
Party guys.
Yeah. So is this podcast also going to be video?
There is video here. I don't put the video up yet.
I was just going to say, I post my picture back here.
I like that.
It's my son's artwork.
Oh, is it really?
I'm going to, yeah.
How old is he?
It was just a sketch he had. He's 2. No, I'm kidding. He's 22.
Oh, that's fantastic.
So this is some of the little sketch he had. He's 22. In fact, he's turned 22 yesterday, and he's graduating from Boston University.
Oh, fantastic.
Next week. Yeah.
Congrats on that.
Yeah.
So, cool. Well, thank you for doing this. The album is Jump for Joy, June 4th.
June 4th on 30 Tigers, and I'm going to plug my patreon.com/Gary Louris.
Cool.
I do that. I have that. You can subscribe for as little as $5. You get a lot of content. I will do an occasional Facebook Live, usually once a month, of a bit of a show. Otherwise...
Nice. Well, I can't wait to see you live. That'll be the most exciting part.
Me either. We are scheduled. The first live show we have scheduled since March 8th of last year is in Spain. We're supposed to go to Spain in the middle of July or early July. We'll see if that happens or not. But
excellent. That's what we need to see. Well, stay healthy, my friend.
All right.
Thank you for doing this.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
That's our show this week. We thank our sponsor, Playboy Condoms, for supporting these episodes. To follow what's happening with this podcast, you can go to theradicalpod.com. You'll find past episodes, show notes, and even merchandise such as t-shirts and hats. Also, I encourage you to follow and rate us on Apple, Spotify, Google, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Also, please follow us on social media, The Radical Pod, where we reveal more about upcoming guests. Thanks for listening and spreading the word.